The colonists of Helios 7 had exactly three things going for them: breathable air, drinkable water, and enough precious minerals to make Earth's biggest mining corporations drool. What they didn't have, as it turned out, was a defense against 60-foot plasma-breathing reptiles with an attitude problem. Commander Rex Thompson stood at the observation deck of Colony Hub Alpha, watching the fourth settlement this week go up in flames. The massive holographic display showed real-time footage from surveillance drones, and he had to admit, the dragons had style. They didn't just destroy buildings, they turned them into artistic statements of destruction. "Sir," Lieutenant Chen's voice cracked over the comm. "The latest numbers are in. Settlement 12 is, well, it's toast. Literally." "Thank you for that astute observation, Lieutenant. I hadn't noticed the giant flying lizards using our residential blocks as barbecue practice." Rex rubbed his temples, wondering if the Academy had prepared him for this level of absurdity. Spoiler alert, it hadn't. The first attack had come 3 standard weeks ago. Initially, everyone thought it was some kind of mass hallucination caused by local fungi. After all, dragons weren't real. They were the stuff of Earth's ancient mythology, not something you encountered on a mining colony 20 light-years from home. Tell that to the dragons. The colony's defense forces had responded with typical human bravado. Lots of guns, lots of explosions, and absolutely zero effect. Turned out, when you're dealing with creatures that could shrug off tactical missiles like they were spitballs, conventional warfare needed a serious rethink. "Get me Admiral Zhang," Rex ordered, watching as another building collapsed in a spectacular shower of sparks. "And someone please tell the science team to stop trying to classify these things. I don't care if they're technically xenopterans or whatever fancy term they've coined. They're dragons, they're burning our stuff, and we need solutions, not taxonomy lessons." The holographic display flickered as a new threat appeared, a massive beast with scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The defense turrets, bless their utterly useless hearts, opened fire automatically. The dragon didn't even bother dodging. The rounds just disappeared into its scales. "Well," Rex muttered, "that's new and terrifying." The colony's remaining defense squadron scrambled to engage. Rex watched as the pilots, some of Earth's finest, executed textbook maneuvers against a creature that clearly hadn't read the textbook. The dragon barrel rolled through their formation, its plasma breath cutting through 2 fighters like they were made of paper. "Sir," Chen's voice returned, somehow even more strained. Admiral Zhang's response just came in. "Let me guess, hold the line, help is coming." "Actually, sir, it just says LOL, good luck." Rex stared at the display, watched another building turn into abstract art, and finally did what any responsible military commander would do in this situation. He laughed. Because sometimes, when faced with the utterly ridiculous, laughter is the only sane response. "Chen, get me the experimental weapons division. If we're going to fight fairy tale creatures, we might as well start thinking like we're in one." As if in response, the black dragon turned its head toward the observation deck and, Rex could have sworn, winked at him. It was going to be one of those days, again. The Emergency Response Center of the Earth Defense Force looked exactly like you'd expect. Lots of serious people making serious faces at serious holographic displays. The only unusual element was the cartoonish dragon doodle someone had drawn on the main strategic board, complete with googly eyes and a speech bubble saying, "Nom nom nom, tasty humans." Admiral Wesley Chang was not amused. Would someone please erase that artistic contribution? No one moved. The doodle remained, adding a surreal touch to the otherwise grim proceedings. "Right then," he continued, straightening his perfectly pressed uniform. "Let's address the plasma-breathing elephant, or rather dragon, in the room. Our conventional forces on Helios 7 are getting their posteriors handed to them on a silver platter, garnished with plasma sauce." The assembled military brass shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Nobody liked admitting that humanity's most advanced weapons were about as effective as throwing wadded-up paper at a tank. Dr. Olivia Rodriguez, head of xenobiology, cleared her throat. "If I may, Admiral, we've been analyzing the combat footage, and we've noticed something interesting." She pulled up a thermal imaging sequence. "These creatures aren't just resistant to our weapons, they're actively absorbing the energy." "Wonderful," someone muttered. "They're not just unkillable, they're charging their batteries with our attacks." "Actually," Dr. Rodriguez continued, a hint of excitement creeping into her voice, "this might be our way in. Everything that absorbs energy has to release it somewhere. These dragons are essentially giant capacitors with wings. Admiral Chang leaned forward. And capacitors can overload. Precisely, Rodriguez grinned. We've been hitting them with high-energy weapons, but what if we did the opposite? What if we went low-tech? The room erupted in confused murmurs. Colonel Patel, commander of the 5th Tactical Division, looked like he'd just bitten into a lemon. Are you suggesting we fight space dragons with pointy sticks? Better, Rodriguez replied. I'm suggesting we fight them with science, really basic science. She pulled up another hologram, this one showing complex chemical formulas. These creatures maintain their plasma-breathing ability through a delicate balance of internal temperature regulation. We disrupt that balance, And boom? Asked Chang hopefully. More like fzit, Rodriguez made a deflating gesture with her hands. But yes, essentially boom. The dragon doodle on the board seemed to be smirking now, though nobody had touched it. The real kicker, Rodriguez continued, is that we already have everything we need. We just need to repurpose some mining equipment. Admiral Chang stared at the formulas, then at the footage of burning colonies, then at the increasingly smug-looking dragon doodle. You know what? At this point, I'm willing to try anything, even if it means looking like complete idiots in the process. Oh, we're going to look like complete idiots, Rodriguez assured him cheerfully. But if it works, we'll have beaten dragons with the equivalent of a science fair project, Chang finished. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. The media's going to love this. As if on cue, another report from Helios 7 flashed across the screens, another settlement under attack. But this time, instead of despair, the room was filled with an air of calculated mischief. Sometimes humanity's greatest weapon wasn't its advanced technology or military might. Sometimes it was the ability to look at an impossible problem and think, what if we tried something completely ridiculous? The dragon doodle winked, or maybe it was just a glitch in the holographic display. Either way, Operation Dragonfall was about to begin, and it was going to be spectacular, one way or another. The research and development facility on Helios 7's moon looked less like a military installation and more like what would happen if you let caffeinated engineers loose in a hardware store. Mining equipment lay scattered everywhere, torn apart and reassembled in ways that would make their manufacturers cry. Dr. Rodriguez stood in the middle of the chaos, directing traffic like a conductor in front of a very unconventional orchestra. No, the liquid nitrogen goes in the blue tanks, not the red ones, unless you want to turn this whole facility into a very expensive fireworks display. Commander Rex Thompson watched from the observation deck, nursing his third cup of coffee. So, let me get this straight. We're fighting dragons with glorified fire extinguishers. Supercooled plasma dispersal units, Rodriguez corrected automatically. And yes, basically, they're very fancy fire extinguishers. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Below them, the first batch of what the troops had nicknamed dragon dampeners was rolling off the makeshift assembly line. They looked like someone had crossed a mining laser with a refrigerator and then added unnecessary blinking lights because, well, why not? And you're sure this will work? Rex asked, watching as a test dummy was frozen solid by an errant blast. Define work, Rodriguez replied cheerfully. Will it stop them from burning our colonies? Probably. Will it look dignified? Absolutely not. The training of the newly formed Dragon Response Units was going about as well as you'd expect when you're teaching hardened combat veterans to use what essentially amounted to oversized freeze rays. Remember, Sergeant Major Zhao bellowed at his squad, these aren't your standard weapons. You have to lead your target by twice the usual distance because the dispersal pattern is affected by wind conditions, and for heaven's sake, stop trying to make ice puns every time you pull the trigger. But Sarge, Private Johnson protested, how often do you get to legitimately say freeze in combat? One more ice pun and you're on latrine duty until the dragons learn table manners. The first field test came sooner than anyone expected. A lone dragon, smaller than the others but no less destructive, decided to investigate the facility's perimeter defenses. What it found instead was 30 heavily armed soldiers carrying experimental weapons and 3 weeks' worth of pent-up frustration. Target acquired, Zhao's voice crackled over the comm. Operation Cold Shoulder is a go. Rodriguez winced at the pun but kept her eyes glued to the monitors. This was the moment of truth. The dragon swooped in, probably expecting the usual ineffective response of bullets and missiles. What it got instead was a coordinated barrage of supercooled plasma that turned the air around it into something resembling Arctic slush. The effect was immediate and hilarious. The dragon's next plasma burst came out as more of a plasma burp, followed by what could only be described as a draconic expression of complete bewilderment. "Direct hit on target," Zhao reported, unable to keep the glee out of his voice. "And is it hiccuping?" Indeed, the fearsome creature was now hovering in midair, producing small puffs of rapidly cooling plasma and looking thoroughly confused about this turn of events. "Secondary systems engaged," another soldier called out. The next wave of weapons fired, these ones delivering a payload of specialized chemical compounds designed to disrupt the dragon's internal temperature regulation. The dragon sneezed, actually sneezed. A small cluster of ice crystals shot from its nostrils. "I think," Rex said slowly, "we just gave a dragon the equivalent of brain freeze." The creature shot them what could only be described as a deeply offended look before turning tail and fleeing, still hiccuping little clouds of frozen plasma. The facility erupted in cheers. Rodriguez was already typing furiously on her tablet, making adjustments to the formula. "Did you see that chemical reaction? We can improve the dispersal rate by at least 30% if we just—" Rex tuned her out, watching the radar as the dragon disappeared into the distance. For the first time in weeks, he felt something approaching optimism. They looked ridiculous. Their weapons were essentially weaponized air conditioners, and he was pretty sure someone was going to get court-martialed for naming the next operation, "Dragons are not cool with this." But it worked. It actually worked. "All right, people," he announced over the general comm. "Good news. We've got proof of concept. Bad news, we've just insulted the pride of an entire species of plasma-breathing death lizards. Let's get to work on scaling this up before they come back with friends." Somewhere in the distance, a very confused dragon was probably trying to explain to its companions why its fire now came with ice cubes. Operation Frost and Found began at dawn because, apparently, military tradition demanded that all major offensives start at dawn, even on a planet with 30-hour days. The assembled forces of humanity's finest dragon hunters looked like a cross between a special operations unit and an industrial refrigeration company's service team. "Remember your training," Sergeant Major Zhao addressed the assembled troops. "Hit them hard, hit them fast, and for the love of all that's holy, someone make sure Johnson's mic is muted before he starts with the ice puns again." The target was a massive dragon nest carved into the side of Mount Prometheus, because apparently dragons had a flair for dramatic real estate choices. Thermal imaging showed at least 12 adult dragons inside, though the readings were slightly confused by the whole creatures that breathe plasma thing. Commander Rex Thompson watched from the mobile command center as the first wave moved into position. "Status report?" "All units in position," Lieutenant Chen replied. "Dragon dampener units charged and ready. Support teams standing by with the new Mark II cooling systems. Medical teams are playing cards." "They're confident. I like that." The first sign that things weren't going to go according to plan came when the dragons emerged from their nest. Instead of the usual aggressive charge, they emerged in formation. Actual military formation. "Well," Rex muttered, "that's unfortunate." The dragons had adapted. Their scales had developed a strange crystalline coating that seemed to deflect the initial bursts from the dragon dampeners. The lead dragon, a massive beast with scales like polished obsidian, actually seemed to smirk as the cooling beams dissipated harmlessly against its new armor. "They've developed heat-resistant scales," Dr. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the comm, a mix of professional horror and scientific excitement. "The chemical composition must have triggered an adaptive response in their molecular structure." "Doctor," Rex interrupted, "fascinating as that is, could we focus on not getting barbecued?" The dragons launched their counterattack with devastating precision. The crystalline coating on their scales didn't just defend against the cooling weapons, it reflected them. Beams of supercooled plasma bounced off dragon scales, forcing the human forces to dodge their own weapons. "Fall back to position Beta," Zhao ordered. "Initiate Protocol Frost Giant." Protocol Frost Giant, as it turned out, was the code name for their backup plan. Massive terraforming engines, repurposed from their original mining duties, rumbled to life. The machines that had once been used to make the planet more habitable now served a different purpose. They began actively manipulating the local atmosphere. Environmental control systems online, a technician reported, local temperature dropping rapidly. The dragons noticed the change immediately. Their plasma breath began to sputter and fade as the air temperature plummeted, but instead of retreating, they did something unexpected. They started working together. The smaller dragons formed a circle around their larger companions, their crystalline scales reflecting and focusing the remaining heat into the center. The larger dragons then combined their plasma breath, creating a sustained beam of energy that cut through the artificial cold like a blowtorch through butter. They're using geometric formations to amplify their attack power, Rodriguez observed, her voice filled with inappropriate academic enthusiasm. The crystalline structures in their scales are acting as focusing lenses. Doctor, Rex gritted through clenched teeth, unless you have a solution, please stop admiring the enemy's tactical innovations. Oh, but I do, her fingers flew across her console. The crystalline structure, it's perfect. Too perfect. Before Rex could ask what she meant, Rodriguez had already patched herself into the general command frequency. All units, switch your dragon dampeners to maximum power and aim at the ground beneath the dragon formation. Now, the troops, trained to follow orders even when they made no sense, complied. The combined effect of dozens of cooling beams hitting the rocky ground created an instant sheet of ice, and more importantly, a massive thermal shock that rippled through the air. The perfect crystalline formations on the dragon's scales couldn't handle the sudden temperature differential. With a sound like breaking glass, the protective coating began to crack and shatter. Now that's what I call breaking the ice, Johnson's voice rang out over the comm before his mic was hastily muted. The dragons, suddenly vulnerable again, tried to maintain their formation, but the damage was done. Their coordinated attack fell apart as individual dragons tried to shake off the remaining crystal shards. All units, press the advantage, Rex ordered. Modified attack pattern Delta. The human forces surged forward, their weapons now augmented with ultrasonic pulse generators, a last-minute addition inspired by watching crystal glasses shatter at parties. The combination of extreme cold and targeted sound waves proved too much for the dragons' natural defenses. One by one, the mighty creatures were forced to retreat, their sophisticated tactics reduced to chaos by the unexpected counter-strategy. The obsidian-scaled leader was the last to leave, fixing the human forces with a look that clearly said, "This isn't over." As the last dragon disappeared into the clouds, Rex allowed himself a small smile. Damage report. 3 vehicles lost, 6 dragon dampeners destroyed, and Johnson has somehow managed to compile a list of 300 ice-related puns despite having his mic muted, Chen reported. And the nest? Secured, sir. Though Dr. Rodriguez is insisting we classify it as a specimens of extraordinary xenobiological significance rather than big hole in mountain where dragons lived. The victory was significant, but Rex couldn't shake the feeling that they had just graduated from fighting animals to engaging in warfare with an intelligent, adaptive species. The dragons weren't just learning, they were innovating, strategizing, and somewhere out there that obsidian-scaled dragon was probably planning its next move. The captured dragon nest revealed more than just a sophisticated living space, it was a library. The walls were covered in plasma-etched markings that made ancient hieroglyphs look like children's drawings. Dr. Rodriguez hadn't slept in 3 days, which was probably why she was currently hugging a scanning device and crying tears of joy. It's not just communication, she explained to the assembled command staff, her words coming out at approximately the speed of light. It's a complete historical record. They have a government, they have laws, they have a standardized system for measuring plasma temperature, for crying out loud. Commander Rex Thompson stared at the holographic reconstructions of the dragon markings. Are you telling me we've been fighting the dragon equivalent of a civilized society? Oh, it's better than that, Rodriguez grinned manically. We've been fighting their military response to what they perceived as an invasion of their ancestral territory. These aren't just random dragons, they're an organized defense force. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't dealing with sophisticated animals. They were at war with a species that had its own military doctrine. There's more, Rodriguez continued, pulling up a particular section of markings. They have a leadership structure. All those dragons we've been fighting, They're the equivalent of middle management. The real power is something they call the eternal flame. As if on cue, every sensor in the colony went berserk. The sky darkened as something massive descended from the upper atmosphere. The obsidian-scaled dragon they'd fought earlier appeared, but this time it was flanked by two even larger dragons with scales that seemed to shift colors like oil on water. Speaking of which, Rex muttered, I think upper management just arrived. The eternal flame, as it turned out, made all other dragons look like garden lizards. Its scales weren't just black, they seemed to absorb light itself. When it moved, the air distorted around it as if reality itself was trying to get out of its way. Incoming transmission, Chen announced, sounding both terrified and impressed. They're using our own communication frequencies. The voice that came through the speakers was impossibly deep, each word carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the human spine. Your weapons are impressive, little warmths. Your tactics adequate, but you have committed a grave error. Just one, Rex couldn't help asking. You assumed we were attacking. The dragon's tone carried something that might have been amusement. We were conducting immigration enforcement. Dr. Rodriguez almost dropped her tablet. Immigration, oh no, the mining colonies. We've been building settlements in their migration paths. The Eternal Flame's next words confirmed her theory. For 10,000 cycles, my people have used these thermals for our young to learn the winds. Your structures disrupt the sacred paths. Rex looked at the massive dragon, then at the colony's buildings, then back at the dragon. So this entire conflict could have been avoided with some proper zoning regulations. Indeed, now the dragon was definitely amused. Though your response to our enforcement has been entertaining, none have ever thought to fight fire with ice. The command staff exchanged looks. This was either going to end in diplomatic relations or spectacular destruction, possibly both. I don't suppose, Rex ventured, we could discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement, perhaps combining your knowledge of thermal currents with our need for mineral extraction? The Eternal Flame was silent for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, it laughed, a sound like distant thunder mixed with a volcanic eruption. At last, a reasonable proposal. Perhaps you warmths are not as primitive as you appear. High praise from someone who's probably older than our entire civilization, Rex muttered. You have no idea, the dragon rumbled. Now shall we discuss terms? I believe your species calls it zoning and mineral rights negotiation. And just like that, the great dragon-human war evolved into something far more terrifying. A series of planning committee meetings with beings that could literally breathe plasma. Well, Rex said to no one in particular, at least we won't need to heat the conference room. The joint human-dragon planning session looked like the setup to a bizarre joke. On one side of the holographic display, Commander Rex Thompson and his staff. On the other, the Eternal Flame and two iridescent-scaled advisors. In the middle, a map showing the location of a rogue dragon faction that had decided that peaceful coexistence was for weaklings. Let me get this straight, Rex said, pointing at the massive volcanic fortress marked on the map. Some of your people are staging a rebellion because they think you've gone soft by talking to us. Correct, the Eternal Flame rumbled. The flame purists believe that any species that cannot naturally breathe plasma is unworthy of consideration. Rough crowd, Lieutenant Chen muttered. The situation had evolved from a simple territorial dispute into something far more complex. The flame purists, led by a particularly nasty piece of work called the Cinder Lord, had taken control of an ancient dragon stronghold inside an active volcano because apparently regular fortresses weren't dramatic enough. Our cooling weapons won't work in that environment, Dr. Rodriguez pointed out. The ambient temperature would neutralize them before they got within range. And our traditional tactics would be expected, one of the iridescent dragons added. The purists know all our strategies. Rex studied the holographic display, a crazy idea forming in his mind. What about strategies they don't know, ones that combine both our capabilities? The Eternal Flame's eyes narrowed with interest. Explain. What followed was either the most brilliant or most insane battle plan in human history, possibly both. The human engineers worked around the clock, modifying their technology to work with dragon physiology rather than against it. The day of the assault arrived with appropriate dramatic flare, thunderclouds, volcanic rumbling, the works. The flame purists watched from their fortress as the combined human-dragon force approached. "This is either going to be spectacular or spectacularly stupid," Rex commented from his position in a specially modified command vehicle. "All units commence Operation Mixed Signals." The first wave appeared to be traditional dragon formations, but each dragon now carried a human-designed resonance amplifier. When they breathed plasma, the amplifiers created a synchronized wave pattern that made the very air vibrate. The purists responded with their own plasma breath, expecting a simple clash of fire. Instead, the amplified plasma waves created a phenomenon Dr. Rodriguez had dubbed constructive plasma interference. The resulting explosion lit up the sky like a miniature sun. "Phase 2, Rex ordered. Cold fusion." The human ground forces moved in, their vehicles now equipped with modified cooling systems that worked in reverse. Instead of trying to neutralize dragon fire, they superheated the air in specific patterns. "Your warmths are surprisingly devious," the Eternal Flame commented approvingly as the plan unfolded. The alternating hot and cold zones created artificial thermal currents, disrupting the purists' ability to maintain stable flight patterns. Dragons who had spent millennia mastering aerial combat suddenly found themselves caught in artificial windstorms. The Cinderlord emerged from the fortress, a massive beast with scales like burning coal. "Betrayer!" it roared at the Eternal Flame. "You ally with these wingless worms." "I ally with those who show wisdom," the Eternal Flame responded. "They turned their weakness into strength. What have you done except cling to old prejudices?" The Cinderlord's response was a plasma blast that could have melted a small mountain. But the human dragon force was ready. The modified resonance amplifiers activated at full power, turning the blast into a complex standing wave of plasma. "Now!" Rex shouted. Dr. Rodriguez activated the master control sequence. Every cooling unit, every thermal regulator, every piece of human technology synchronized with the dragon's natural abilities. The result was something that physics professors would later spend years trying to explain: a plasma tornado contained within a shell of supercooled air. The flame purists watched in horror as their own attack was transformed into a prison. The artificial thermal currents, now spinning at incredible speeds, created a vortex that even dragons couldn't escape. "I believe," Rex said into the sudden silence, "this would be a good time to discuss terms of surrender." The Cinderlord, trapped in the eye of a storm of its own making, looked from the human forces to their dragon allies and back again. Its expression shifted from rage to something approaching respect. "Perhaps," it admitted grudgingly, "there is something to be said for new perspectives." The Eternal Flame's response carried a distinct note of smugness. "Indeed, it is amazing what one can accomplish when not blinded by pride." As the combined forces secured the fortress and began accepting surrenders from the purist faction, Rex found himself standing next to one of the iridescent dragon advisors. "You know," he said, watching humans and dragons working together to dismantle the plasma tornado, "when I woke up this morning, I didn't expect to help create a new form of weather." The dragon made a sound that might have been laughter. "And I did not expect to find wisdom in beings who live their entire lives touching the ground. Life is full of surprises." "Speaking of surprises," Rex added, "someone really needs to tell Johnson that Dragon These Rebels to Justice is not an acceptable operation name." The dragon's response was lost in the general chaos of victory, but Rex could have sworn it sounded like a chuckle. 3 months after the Battle of the Volcanic Fortress, as everyone insisted on calling it, despite Rex's attempts to give it a more professional-sounding name, the first Joint Human-Dragon Administrative Council convened in the newly constructed Thermal Harmony Center. The building was an architectural marvel that somehow managed to be comfortable for both plasma-breathing reptiles and their significantly more flammable human counterparts. "Point of order," Rex called out, consulting his tablet. "We need to address the incident in Sector 7 involving the unauthorized dragon racing circuit and certain members of our engineering staff." The Eternal Flame's eyes gleamed with what might have been amusement. "Ah, yes, the dragon drift situation. That's not what we're calling it," Rex said quickly, but he could already see the name catching on. The humans and younger dragons in the chamber were trying very hard not to look too excited about the concept. The new balance of power on Helios 7 was unlike anything in human colonial history. Dragons patrolled the thermal corridors, ensuring safe passage for both their own kind and human aircraft. Human technology regulated the atmospheric conditions, maintaining zones suitable for both species. The mining operations had been completely redesigned with dragon input, resulting in efficiency rates that made Earth's corporate executives weep with joy. Next on the agenda, one of the iridescent dragons announced the proposal for joint emergency response teams. Dr. Rodriguez, now heading the newly formed Department of Xeno-Draconic Relations, pulled up a holographic presentation. The idea is to combine dragon plasma abilities with our cooling technology for firefighting and disaster response. Early trials have been interesting. 3 melted facilities is not interesting, Rex muttered. 3 melted facilities is valuable data, Rodriguez corrected cheerfully. The protocols governing human-dragon interactions had evolved from simple territorial agreements into a complex system that somehow worked, despite occasionally defying several laws of physics and common sense. The dragons provided aerial security and thermal management, while humans handled technology and infrastructure. Both species had quickly discovered they complemented each other in ways neither had expected. Of course, there were challenges. The flame purists, while officially disbanded, had sparked a philosophical debate among both species about tradition versus progress. Some humans were uncomfortable with the idea of sharing technology with a species that could literally melt their face off. Some dragons found human methodology unnecessarily complicated. Update on cultural exchange programs, another dragon counselor rumbled. Several humans winced at the memory of last week's attempt at a joint cuisine night. Turns out dragons preferred their food at temperatures that could melt steel. Maybe we should focus on music instead, Chen suggested. The resonance amplifier technology has shown some interesting applications in that area. You want to start a dragon boy band, don't you? Rex accused. Chen's innocent expression fooled absolutely no one. The meeting continued, a bizarre mix of serious policy discussion and moments that made Rex question the nature of reality itself, like the proposal for dragon-assisted space launches or the ongoing debate about whether plasma breath could be used to make the perfect cup of coffee. As the session wound down, the Eternal Flame raised one final point. The deep space thermal anomalies have increased. The chamber fell silent. The anomalies had been detected shortly after the Alliance formed, strange heat signatures from the edge of the system that matched neither human nor dragon patterns. The investigation teams are assembled, Rex reported. Mixed crews, best of both species. Whatever's out there, we'll be ready. Indeed, the Eternal Flame rumbled, though perhaps this time we should attempt diplomacy before freezing or burning anything. What, and break our perfect record of starting every first contact with a fight? Rex grinned. But yes, agreed. We've learned that lesson rather thoroughly. As the council dispersed, Rex stood at the observation window, watching dragons and human ships moving through the evening sky in perfect formation. 3 years ago, if someone had told him he'd be helping to run a joint government with plasma-breathing space dragons, he'd have had them tested for hallucinogens. Sir, Chen interrupted his thoughts, the unauthorized high-speed thermal current testing, they're doing it again. Rex sighed. Let me guess, Johnson's leading them. Yes, sir, he's painted too hot to handle on his dragon's cooling harness. Some challenges, it seemed, were universal, but as Rex watched the unofficial race loop around the spires of the colony, dragons and humans moving in perfect sync, he couldn't help but smile. They'd turned a war into an alliance, enemies into friends, and somehow created something entirely new in the process. Though he really needed to do something about those racing leagues before someone tried to add nitrous oxide to a dragon.